the white paper is an offshoot of the State of Entrepreneurship report, and that report showed insights that showed that, male-led businesses were more likely to start a business, across Nigeria, right? With 57% of them starting their businesses, except in the states that you just highlighted, where we had more female-led businesses likely to start their businesses and, showing up in their numbers across those states. Now, the question would be what was responsible for that? Okay. And what we did with putting together the white paper was to, deep dive a bit to find out what actually happened. And what we found was that there was an intentional approach by the state governments. A lot of the state governments involved put in place intentional policies and programs to deliberately support female-led businesses. For example, we engaged Lagos State, so the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund. We engaged Kwara State, the Kwasi program. We engaged Edo State, the Edo Jobs Initiative. And all of these initiatives were deliberate, intentional interventions by the state government. Interesting. And so therefore, that's why we have that map. All right, so you mentioned that 57% number for men, 43% for women. Do you, as far as this number is concerned, you think that's going to grow, or is there room for this figure to grow? What's going to help that happen? Or is it going to stay where it is? Is it going to stagnate? What do you think? I think absolutely there's room for it to grow. The simple answer is a yes. Yeah. The bigger question is how. Yeah. Right? And much like the other state governments that introduced intentional policies and programs, the same needs to happen across board. We need to see efforts like that scaled across board, where there's an intentional approach, where there's intentional support for female-led businesses. Once that happens, yeah, we'll see increase along those lines. And the good thing with this is also that we're releasing our State of Entrepreneurship Report 2022, so it'll be very interesting to see what the numbers are saying this year. Looking forward to that. Okay, so these numbers that we just had, let's put that back up. It's very encouraging here. 65% of female-led businesses experience post-lockdown growth. Right. 93% have expressed high optimism for the future. As far as the post-lockdown growth is concerned, at this high level of optimism, what's behind that? Is it you? Is it the Faith Foundation? Yes, I'd like to take a bit of credit for that. But with regards to optimism, honestly, I would attribute that to the resilience of the people, of Nigerian female entrepreneurs, really. Because a lot of them were optimistic about the future of their businesses over the next year. This was 2021. So looking at 2022, they were optimistic about increase in sales, about market demand, and all of that. And then for the growth, understandably, after the lockdown was lifted, there was increase in market demand as the economy was opening up. So understandably, they experienced some growth in their businesses. So that was what was responsible. All right. Now, the report also has, I believe, value propositions for supporting female-led businesses. Can you talk us through some of those value propositions? Yeah, we've got them on screen right now. Yeah. So what? Right. So when we talk about the value propositions, what we were trying to do with this was to make a case for supporting female-led businesses, right? And not to come from an emotional standpoint. Why do we need to support female-led businesses? One, we are seeing that, they're increasing in their numbers. So they're becoming a formidable group that you can't exactly ignore. But more so because, one, we've experienced that they have lower write-ups and portfolio risks. And what that means is that a lot of female entrepreneurs tend to pay back their debts. Now, if you're looking to invest in a business, that sounds like music to your ears. Yes. When there's no default. When you know that if you invest in this person, she's going to make returns on the business, she's going to be accountable for what was invested. What we also found was that female entrepreneurs make good managers. They are great with managing resources, so stretching resources as much as possible to yield as much outcomes as possible, considering the situation that they're in. We also found that they run impact-focused businesses. Typically, we'll find that a female entrepreneur, for example, could decide to start a business because her child could not feed on the food supply that was available in the market. And then she develops something and then introduces it into the market, and before you know it, the business starts. So they tend to start impact-focused led businesses. The other thing is that they are great with multitasking,
And what we found with putting together this white paper is that the reality for a lot of female entrepreneurs is that they're running households and also running businesses at the same time. So they're great with that. Yeah. And then finally, they're great with digital agility. Our reports actually show that a lot of female entrepreneurs were very swift to pivot during the pandemic and even post-pandemic. So when it comes to technology adoption, a lot of female entrepreneurs are great with that. So these are some of the points that we can make for supporting female-led businesses. They're definitely a group and a bunch to look out for.
Indeed. Okay, the challenges. There's a litany of challenges in the reports. How do you get over? I think we can put them up. I mean, it's a lot of them. How do you get past these challenges?
So first things first is to understand what is happening within the space with regards to female-led businesses, right? So we have access to finance. Understandably, that's a major issue within the ecosystem anyway. We have limited access to financial literacy and investor readiness knowledge. I'll start with access to finance, right? One of the things we observed was that there are different layers to the access to finance challenge or problem, right? And so for a lot of female-led businesses, while they're able to access some money to start a business, so if we're looking at maybe 500,000 naira to about 5 million naira, they could get that through a grant or a program. But then when it's time to scale that business and expand, so we're looking for upwards of about 10 million naira to about 50 million naira, 100 million naira, then you find that gap where you don't have funding programs that actually provide that sort of money to support them. So that's one issue we sort of identified within that space. With regards to limited access to limited financial literacy, and investor readiness knowledge. This, in a way, feeds the access to finance challenge, because what we also found is that for some of the female-led businesses, they're not great with keeping their financial records. Simple things like separating personal funding from business funding is still a problem. And this is serious, because if you're looking to access funding from anybody, as it were, whether it's government, whether it's equity funding, whether it's even family and friends, it's important that you have your books in order. And so we did observe that gap with regards to financial literacy and investor readiness. What we also observed was the gap around access to information. Interestingly, with the amount of information we have out there across, social media and all of the platforms, we've still found that a lot of female-led businesses or female entrepreneurs do not know, they're not aware of opportunities that exist for them. And so some of the things we touched on, or that I'll touch on in the recommendations, is saying, how do you look at that? How do you bridge that access to information gap? Some of the other issues we also observed include, what's the word now? It's not coming to my head really, but we have unconscious bias. We have societal expectations and cultural norms.
There's a lot. You can be forgiven for not remembering every single one of them, because there's a whole lot of them.
And I think the one that strikes me more really is low confidence levels and a pessimistic mindset. And this was very interesting, because while you have a lot of female-led entrepreneurs running fantastic businesses and, impact-focused businesses, like I just said, you find that a lot of times female entrepreneurs shoot themselves in the foot or hold back, from leveraging opportunities, including opportunities that are specifically designed for them. And many times it's because they disqualify themselves in their minds before they even approach that. I remember when we're putting together this white paper, where we talked about how female entrepreneurs take no differently, as against how a male entrepreneur would take no, So that's something we also observed as a gap and as a challenge. For societal expectations and cultural norms, that's really saying or looking at how societal expectations and cultural norms hold female entrepreneurs back, right? For example, the burden of unpaid care is largely on the woman, right? And so most times juggling the home front with the business, there's really no time to even take a course online, which is very important if you're going to run. Exactly. One of the other challenges is also limited inclusive business training and capacity building programs. So we have a myriad of training programs, but then are they inclusive?
That's the issue.
That's the issue.